to the Universal Design for Learning webinar series, created by State Support Team Region 12 UDL Consultants. Session 4 will focus on the principle of representation. I'm Susan Larson, and I'll be narrating this session. The expected outcomes for this webinar are participants will develop an understanding of the principle of representation, guidelines, and checkpoints, and identify ways to reduce barriers to learning and create learning opportunities in the classroom. Representation. This principle is associated with the what of learning, which uses the recognition network in our brain. According to CAST, the Center for Applied Science and Technology, learners differ in the ways they perceive and comprehend information. Learners might have sensory disabilities like blindness or deafness, learning disabilities, or language or cultural differences. Each learner requires different ways of approaching content. Some learners may grasp information quicker or more efficiently through visual or auditory means rather than printed text. Learning and transfer of learning occurs when multiple representations are used. They allow learners to make connections within as well as between concepts. What are some of the barriers for the learners in your classroom? Pause the webinar and reflect on those barriers. Resume the webinar when you are ready. You might encounter some barriers to learning in your classroom, such as students with vision or hearing difficulties or students with speech limitations. How could assistive technology help support your learners? The 3 UDL principles are divided into 3 guidelines with several checkpoints. Time is needed to explore and think deeply about each one of the guidelines and its corresponding checkpoints. You will have an opportunity to complete an activity aligned to this principle after the webinar. But please keep in mind, you will revisit this information continually as you design lessons and implement UDL. The checkpoints you focus on for a particular lesson will depend on the learning goal. And remember, these are meant to be suggestions, not a prescription. You will not focus on all of these at once. During this webinar, we are going to look at the first row, which is the access row, and dive deeper into perception and one of the checkpoints. In the access row, the suggestion is to provide options for perception. Let's look deeper into the first checkpoint. Offer ways of customizing the display of information. Here is a standard from the Model Curriculum for Physical Education, grades 6 through 8. Let's focus on specialized skills and movement patterns for grade 6. Number 1 states, demonstrate movement patterns in dance, gymnastics, or fitness. For example, yoga, Zumba. Pause the webinar and brainstorm some options for perception and how you could offer ways of customizing the display of information without changing the goal. If you'd like some ideas to get you started, access the Goalbook app, which includes a toolkit with strategies. The link can be found on the UDL Webinar Series Google Doc. Resume the webinar when you are ready to continue. Providing options for customizing the display of information when teaching this skill could involve the use of visual boundaries or other visual supports. Maybe footprints on the gym floor or color coding steps. Keep in mind, while modeling or showing a video of the movement patterns is a good practice, it may not be enough for learners to grasp the concept and achieve mastery. Thinking about the other UDL principles, what options for engagement would be appropriate? What options for action and expression would be appropriate? Pause the webinar if you'd like to extend your thinking or discussion to the other UDL principles. Resume the webinar when you are ready to continue. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into this principle and its guidelines and checkpoints, please complete the activity provided on the UDL Webinar Series Google Doc. You will be using one of your own lessons, your choice, and some reflective questions to look at each of the guidelines and checkpoints. We have included some additional links to resources to support your learning. After completing the activity, you may choose to complete and submit the Google Reflection Form. A certificate of professional development for 1 contact hour will be sent to your email. Additional resources are found on the last page of the UDL webinar series Google Doc. Thank you for watching this webinar. To explore the third UDL principle of action and expression, be sure to watch the next webinar in our series.